Here I'm continuing with the Proto-Renaissance, and we'll look more in depth on Giotto. This is an image of the Scrovegni Chapel. It's also called the Arena Chapel. It's in Padua, which is in North Italy, and the reason we're looking at it is because Giotto painted in it. And Giotto is from Florence, and most of the work that we're going to look at is by Florentine painters. That they sort of began this Proto-Renaissance, and well, it was specifically Giotto did, and he was called away in different parts of Italy to paint, and almost everything that he did is outside of Florence that we still have. So in this chapel is a lot of frescoes, and the whole thing was made so as to house these frescoes. If you look at the outside, it's essentially a box. It's not a significant building architecturally. It's just a box to hold paintings, and it has windows on one side to let enough light in so you can see them. There's one door in the middle and an altar on the other end. So inside you walk in and there's beautiful colors, and it's all painted in fresco. You should look at a video on fresco. I'll probably put a link to one on how fresco is made. But it's done on wet plaster, and so they plaster the wall and put paint directly onto the wet plaster, and as it dries and hardens, the paint is fit into the matrix. This is a very small place. If you look here, this is what it looks like looking at the wall that has the door. On the other end is the altar. And here's a photo that sort of gives you a sense of the scale of the building. It's about the size of like a basketball court. Let me tell you a little bit about Scrovegni, the patron of it. He was a man who made his money, rich guy. He made his money through usury, which is a sin. His father also made his money that way. And in Dante's Inferno, his father appears as one of the damned souls in hell, and he's the exemplar of the usurer, and he's being punished for his usury. This man, Scrovegni, is the son who's the patron here. He was he made his money that way too, and was afraid that he would go to hell just like his father. So he made this donation to the church and had this church built in order for his own atonement. He wanted to buy himself into heaven, or at least out of hell, and that was pretty much the way it was done. There was the society was made up of rich people and poor people, and there were very few rich people. But unlike in the Middle Ages, where essentially there's the royals, there's the church, and then there's the vast number of peasants underneath, one of the driving forces of the Renaissance economically was the rise of a middle class. That is, people who could go from being at the bottom to the middle, at least, by their own efforts of work and having a business, producing something. And, and people like this, who was essentially bankers, would rise to the top and have enough money to fund something like this. Now, it's not the most expensive thing he could have done. I mean, as rich people go, he wasn't so rich that he could afford a much more lavish thing, like a whole chapel in a church and fill it with lots of gold and really expensive stuff. Fresco is relatively inexpensive compared to other things you might buy, like marble sculpture would be more expensive. This building has one or a few little marble sculptures here. One's by Pisano, who did the baptistry doors in Florence, and we'll look at those later. But apart from that, it's all fresco. The bottom tier, if you look on this picture, this bottom tier is all faux marble. Marble would be real expensive, but it's painted to look like marble. There's images, little niches and statuary that are painted in there as well, and these represent the virtues and the vices. The rest, this is the end wall here, is the Last Judgment. But all these pictures here, these panels that you see on the wall, are very much like the comics in a newspaper. They're each one is you read it left to right. Up here, there's a story of Mary's parents, Anna and Joachim, and they go along the top row on both sides, and then the other rows, these two rows, are the life of Christ, and with the Last Judgment on the end. On this end, you have an Annunciation right here. This is Gabriel and Mary, and you have Christ in majesty at the top. You have a continuation of the life of Christ here with, I believe this is Judas. I can zoom in a little. This is Judas in the 30 pieces of silver, and this is the Visitation. Down here you see there's just two extra little imagery of this, like the interior of a little room. You can see the ceiling of the room and some sort of fixture hanging in the middle of it. When you think about how this was made and the kind of thing that preceded it in terms of wall decoration, there's a lot of innovations here that are the sort of things that we talk about as moving in the direction of the Renaissance. When you do get into the Renaissance after 1400, they have the invention of perspective. It's a linear perspective or one-point perspective. It is a way of rendering space, or at least of organizing a picture in such a way that everything is seen from a single point of view. And since we're really familiar with photography, and photographs are also an image of something seen from one point of view, from wherever the lens is. We see images that are made with one-point perspective as true to life, as more natural, as the way things look, and we also have all the images from the Renaissance on of things made with that system. So it's a very familiar thing. But when you go before that time, before the notion that a picture was seen from one point of view, you get things where multiple points of view are seen. I mean, because there wasn't any reason not to show one side of one thing and another side of the same thing that you wouldn't see in reality at the same time, but in a picture, there's no reason not to. This is a kind of an in-between stage where if you look at these two little rooms here, this one over here and this one over here, you see this one from the same point of view. From this photograph, the person standing taking this photograph, seeing this room, if this were actually a room back there, it would look like that. The shape of the wall, the amount of covering up that this part does for the back wall looks right from this angle, and the one on this side also looks right from this angle, as if it was intended to be viewed from this point of view, so that it looks right. When you look at other things, like let's look at a close-up of the Annunciation back there. This is the picture divided into the left and the right. Look at this Annunciation is Gabriel telling Mary that she's going to have a baby, and it's going across this archway. But look at these I don't know, terraces, things projecting from a building, box-like shapes with corbels holding them up. They're remarkable in that they look very 3D. The one thing is the linear pattern of them and the way they recede. The one on the left recedes over there that way, and the one on the right recedes this way, just, the way you would expect. And the lighting on them, there's a light comes from one place, and it makes one facet lighter and makes another facet darker, and under here it's darker. So it's conceived as an object in space. It's the theme that I kept harping on the other video. That this new look, this revolution, was making it look as if the picture were the kind of things that you would see in the real world, that is, real objects in space. Let's look at just a section of the wall. Some of the pictures have a remarkable thing that have nothing to do with real objects in space. It's this. This is a lamentation down here. This is the Noli Me Tangere, which is the Christ's resurrection saying, you know, touch me not, to the Mary down here who's about to touch the hem of his garment. This is the feast at Cana, and this is the resurrection of Lazarus. There's Lazarus, and this is a little mountain that goes in the background here. It sort of goes up into the upper right, and it seems to continue on to this mountain over here. That has nothing to do with a spatial relationship. It is a compositional thing. It also, the same mountain, if you think of it as going up here and going down here, it makes sense as a continuation of a compositional thing that links these two together, the death and the resurrection, or the death here and this resurrection up here, which is, you know, the resurrection of Lazarus. So these pictures have a thematic relationship. They also have a formal relationship. Formal meaning the forms of the picture, the lines, the shapes, the tones, all these things that you use to make a picture are used for a purpose other than depicting, but as a way of composing. Another feature, we see everything is done in these rectangular panels. Between the panels are these broad bands of decoration. The decoration's made up of, look up a little closer, are made up of geometric patterns, and they're very elaborate. Lots of little colors, little details in a small space, and there's some extra pictures, like this is the creation of Adam here. You know, other little stories that are within the between each story, and then some of them have some relationship between them and the story going on. Looking up here, there's some saints painted in these quatrefoils up here. So you see, when you look at these pictures, I mean, even if you don't even know the story, you can see that this is a kind of a cartoon version of the Christian stories. There's people here. They are depicted as masses. You can see them as volumes. They have light coming from one side and shadow on the other, so they look real, volumetric, and they seem to stand as almost, you know, boulder-like here. These look like boulders. They're so massive. And anytime there's an architectural space, it looks convincingly real, though in many cases it's abbreviated or reduced in size in relation to the figures so as to get it in the same way that you would have it on a stage representation of this. Like if they had a play and they had these things, this is what the kind of thing they'd have, you know, a set. And he's made them look realistic or naturalistic. Here's another one up here of the shadowing under here. Makes it look like, you know, these things project out, and this is a recession, and there's enough space in here for all these people to be. Let's look at the Lamentation just up close. This is one of the works on your list. Another thing is expression. That is, it's not just telling a story, it's wanting you to feel the story. And the gestures of the people, the expressions on their faces, and the agitation that you see in all the angels up in the sky, all give you an impression of the Lamentation, so that you too would feel what's going on. Here again, looking up closer, you see the boulder-like people here. He wants you to see them as real things in space, and he wants you, as they have weight and mass. And contrast this to the Middle Ages, where figures are paper dolls. These are not like paper dolls. They stand on the ground. They seem to have weight and a presence. And because their faces have expression, they're people like us. They are people you can identify with. If you saw the video that I put the link to for how panel paintings are made, one of the things that they mentioned was that lapis lazuli, which is a precious stone found in Afghanistan, was something used to make blue. and it was a very precious blue. It was more expensive than gold, and the Arena Chapel has a lot of it. The sky is all blue, and if we look back at the thing, the ceiling up here is all blue, and it's very, very expensive. And that was one of the ways that the patron was using his money as a way to show how much he's spending, and by using some gold and using some blue, he's showing off his wealth. I mean, the building itself, of course, is a demonstration of his wealth, and the fact that it's painted by Giotto, the best painter in the world at the time, is also a thing. But it does the same thing. But the blues are a very striking feature of that spending of money. An unfortunate thing about the lapis lazuli, though, is that it's not painted on the wet plaster. Paint that is put onto the wet plaster soaks into the plaster and becomes bonded with it, and it lasts forever. It looks just as fresh, if you can clean it, it looks as fresh as when it was first painted. But the lapis, it doesn't work that way. It has to be painted when it's dry. It's called a secco, on a dry surface. And as a result, it flakes off over time. So I'm sure that when it was first made, blues were very striking and blue all over the place. You can see some areas, though, where blues have flaked off. So you have to pretend that this sort of level of blue up here is in the sky and all these other places there originally was. So imagine all that blue, strong blue in the sky right here, and that this would be a very striking image. The gold halos. I think they put an extra layer of gesso, which is the kind of a plaster stuff that they put as the surface of the picture, on halos in order to raise them a little bit so that they have some dimension to them. And they were gilt. Gold leaf was applied to them to add extra, sparkle and shine and demonstration of wealth. The other work that's on your list is this one. It's called The Kiss of Judas, and it shows some remarkable features. It's a night scene, so it's a darker blue, and and you can see some torches and things. So it occurs at night, but you can see how he's organized the picture in such a way as to amplify the action. Figures are still rendered as very massive. There's just a few of them in the front, and the crowds in the back are represented as just a bunch of heads. This black down in the background, these are the soldiers' helmets, and they would have been silver, and silver tarnishes, and that's why that's black like that. So you can imagine those being really shiny. You see Christ in the middle with Judas, and Judas had told the leaders of the Jewish religious leaders, told them that he would betray Jesus. He would for 30 pieces of silver, and he would tell them which one Jesus is when he came to arrest him by, it's the one that I kiss. So he comes up to him and he kisses him, and Jesus says, you betray me with a kiss. Pointing out the irony of that. But this is a confrontation between good and evil, and Giotto has boiled the story down to just this one image right here in the center. Close up a little bit of it, and he's pointed at it with all these pikes and lanterns, I guess, and this club all point at this area right here for the purpose of making you understand that this is the area of action. And this is not another feature. This is a formal feature. He's using the forms of the picture to amplify the story and to help tell the story and to energize the story. They're not there. They could just as easily be standing straight up and just be depictions of soldiers' pikes. But instead, he's using them in a formal way to do something to the picture. He also does that with this gesture here, this arm reaching out, pointing towards Christ, and this arm here is also pointing towards Christ, and this line here is pointing towards Christ. Everything seems to sweep, and everything is pointing to this one central part, and that's a formal thing that has to do with using the forms of the picture rather than a representational thing. The figure here in the on the left is a figure grabbing the cloak of Peter, who is in the process of cutting the ear off of one of the soldiers, and a moment later Christ picks up the ear and heals it, and in other depictions of this he does do that. But in this scene, he wants to focus your attention on this. He gives you an extra detail of part of the story. This is a necessary part of the story that any depiction of the kiss of Judas is going to have. But it's a minor thing that you could easily miss, and he's using the line of it in a way to help tell the primary story, which is the kiss. I point out these features because we're going to look at another depiction of the kiss of Judas when we get to Giotto, and he does things differently. So remember this one. It has very massive figures. He sees figures as real figures in space with mass, and they stand on the ground, and they have a presence, and you can identify with them. The faces, the expressions, they're all, like us, and they all are like people on a stage. I can show you a few more imagery just so you can get a sense of what the whole thing sort of looks like. Again, the stage-like quality. This is a crucifixion with the cross on this, just a small indication of where Golgotha is, and a little skull there to tell you that that's what it is, in case you didn't know already. Mary Magdalene here, and Mary, the mother of Christ, is swooning and being held up by two people. These are the soldiers who were dividing the cloak in order, because it had no seam. They had to draw lots for it or something. And the angels up in the sky lamenting and creating this agitation. A nativity, and you can see how the blue has flaked off, but you can tell, the boulder-like quality of Joseph here in the front, the realistic depiction of animals in space. These other figures, they're standing on the ground, angels up in the sky. The architecture looks like, a three-dimensional space in which the action can happen. And this last one is the Christ's entry in Jerusalem. And we'll see another version of this by Giotto, so you can remember this one. One innovation here is to have, when Christ entered Jerusalem, the people would take off their cloaks and put them on the ground so that you could walk on them, because there's like royalty coming. And here's a figure who's beginning to take off the sleeve of one garment, and there's another one who's pulling it over their head, and then the one on the ground who's putting it on the ground. So there's almost a kind of a three-step cinematographic representation of an event. So you can see three things happening in time that go in sequence. Remember how he demonstrated, how he rendered a crowd of people. You see a couple up in the front, and they're in front of the ones in the back, and you see all their little halos and the tops of heads over there. So that represents a crowd of people rather than showing each individually, or even stacking them up in the behind up here, so that you see those faces. In the Middle Ages, and Giotto, as we'll see later, will stack them up for the purpose of showing them. He wants to show you everything, but Giotto is committed to a single point of view, or being very close to a single point of view. He is not yet, it's 100 years before perspective is invented, where there's a system for doing that. He's just by eye is making things being seen from the same point of view. Again, look at the formal element of this line here. of the donkey continuing over here into this line here, sort of making this movement go up into this model of Jerusalem that he's going into. This makes a nice little sweep, and here you could also make it sweep back. So it makes a kind of a turbulence going on here. Nice composition. I mean, and the fact that he's thinking in terms of a composition, that he's arranging things on a surface for the purpose of amplifying the story. I just noticed this arch right here is reflected in this one here, so as to create a circle. I don't know what that's for, but it's nice that it looks like an intentional circle there. Okay, so that's Giotto and the Arena Chapel, and you have one other Giotto, the Ogni Santi Madonna, which is the Madonna and Child with saints. And together, he's this represents the big hero of the Renaissance. The Italians now think of him, like we think of George Washington. He's the one who started it all, being punished for his usury. This man, Scrovegni, is the son who's the patron here. He was he made his money that way too, and was afraid that he would go to hell just like his father. So he made this donation to the church and had this church built in order for his own atonement. He wanted to buy himself into heaven, or at least out of hell, and that was pretty much the way it was done. He was called away in different parts of Italy to paint, and almost everything that he did is outside of Florence that we still have. So in this chapel is a lot of frescoes, and the whole thing was made so as to house these frescoes. If you look at the outside, it's essentially a box. It's not a significant building architecturally. It's just a box to hold paintings, and it has windows on one side to let enough light in so you can see them. There's one door in the middle and an altar on the other end. So inside you walk in. Here I'm continuing with the Proto-Renaissance, and we'll look more in depth on Giotto. This is an image of the Scrovegni Chapel. It's also called the Arena Chapel. It's in Padua, which is in North Italy, and the reason we're looking at it is because Giotto painted in it. And Giotto is from Florence, and most of the work that we're going to look at is by Florentine painters. That they sort of began this Proto-Renaissance, and it was specifically Giotto did. And there's beautiful colors, and it's all painted in fresco. You should look at a video on fresco. I'll probably put a link to one on how fresco is made. But it's done on wet plaster, and so they plaster the wall and put paint directly onto the wet plaster, and as it dries and hardens, the paint is fit into the matrix. This is a very small place. If you look here, this is what it looks like looking at the wall that has the door. On the other end is the altar, and here's a photo that sort of gives you a sense of the scale of the building. It's about the size of like a basketball court. Let me tell you a little bit about Scrovegni, the patron of it. He was a man who made his money, rich guy. He made his money through usury, which is a sin. His father also made his money that way, and in Dante's Inferno, his father appears as one of the damned souls in hell, and he's the exemplar of the usurer, and he's